Happy end of August to you, Jahao. I hear in a couple of days you're leaving to Mexico, which is super exciting, given that they're one of the only countries that is available to U.S. travelers right now at the moment.
Yeah. Well, first of all, can you? 2021 is already three-fourths of the way over. Can you believe that?
I can't believe it that there's only, what, 4 months left?
Nine, 10,
It's
11. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well,
gone by so quickly.
yeah. It's insane. I mean, can you believe it's already been nearly one and a half? Well, no, it's almost been 2 years since the 2 years since the beginning of COVID, which started in like what, November?
I believe, yeah, it was November or maybe early December,
Uh huh.
so it's been, wow, almost 2 years.
It's been 1.5 years since we went into lockdown.
And who knows, maybe the lockdowns will continue. So I
Delta,
guess in that sense, it's
everybody's favorite, you know, airline, Delta is bringing us all
and I hate
back.
to be pessimistic, but I heard recently on the news that there was another mutating variant found in South Africa that was apparently more contagious than the Delta variant. Now I don't know
It,
if it's
is
gonna
that
spread as
is
quickly.
that the one that's called Delta Plus?
I don't know actually. I didn't look into it, but somebody on my debate team mentioned it, so that's how I heard about it.
You know would be an amazing would be a very punny marketing tactic for Delta. I mean,
What's that?
just the usual, right? You know, just it like Delta can market themselves as like just like the Delta variant. We reach all over the world.
That's good. Uh, and their product too is just as contagious uh, as the variant in terms of attracting customers and whatnot. You know,
Or
compared to American United, they are much better at creating a contagious affection.
contagious in the sense that it's filthy, and so it is literally contagious. But I don't know.
That too, yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
But I do,
it's not American, so
but I do want to know more about this Mexico trip you have planned because you mentioned to me at least that it was 2 weeks and you're debating how much you're going to pay for it. But I want to hear more about that and what it's going to look
for
like.
sure, for sure. Well, so I mean, as you know, I am actually entering a gap year, before entering university, but because COVID is amazing and all, most countries are still closed to travelers. One country which is not is, of course, Los Estados Unidos Mexicanos, right? And I have been to Mexico. I've been to, well, only like the far ends. I've been to Cancun, tourist haven, and a few border towns, right, which includes, for example, Tijuana. I've never been to Mexico. So I'm thinking, for a change of pace, I was looking at flights. Um, there is a pretty good fare on Viva Aerobus, at least relatively speaking, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's around 175 from Chicago to Mexico City round trip, and I'm thinking
That
of,
was pretty good.
yeah, it's especially compared to Aero Mexico, right, which is like $400. Um, but yeah, I'll probably be flying into. I've not actually booked the tickets yet. I need to do that like ASAP. But I'll probably be flying into Mexico City, staying there for around a week, and then probably taking the bus to Oaxaca, and then have the second week over there before flying back. So yeah.
I've heard very good things about Oaxaca, especially about its food. So um,
Oh, have you been
that
there?
would be. I haven't been to Mexico at all, but
Really?
I have family that have been there a lot for surfing and for touristy purposes, and I've watched YouTube videos of travelers going there. A lot of people have gone there in the past year because of COVID and it being pretty open. So there's been a lot of new travel content on it, but I have not been there at all.
I mean, I'm kind of surprised you haven't been to Mexico ever. Because I would have. I mean, you said you lived in like San Diego for like 5 years, right?
I did. I lived there for almost 8 years, and I never even got south of Chula Vista. I didn't even get to the border in San Ysidro
Really?
at all.
Huh. Because when I went
Some of
when
it,
I went to San Diego, I explicitly made the point to like take the light rail to the border and then walk into Tijuana.
Did you take the bridge that goes from the Tijuana airport over the border, or was it just, or did you go through an actual like border crossing?
It's like the actual, like the busiest one in the world. The what is it? The San Isidro point of entry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just that one. You know, the one that
I haven't even.
the one that the light rail goes to.
Yeah, I didn't even take the light rail that far south, or even go that far south. And maybe it's just because my family really isn't like a warm weather, tropical weather kind of family. We really haven't been to places like that and haven't really sought those opportunities out. But maybe in the future we'll end up in Mexico.
Yeah, you guys. I mean, also said you were planning like to go to. I mean, are you guys planning to go to Salt Lake City soon? I remember you said that.
Usually every year we try to go there in the winter because I have a lot of family there, so we try to visit them and to ski. Because I learned to ski in Utah, so we try to go back every year and just see a bunch of different people. And of course, last year it was COVID and we didn't go, and it was pretty sad because I'd been there for most years prior to that. But flights actually are pretty expensive. They're like $350 to $400 round trip a person
That's
on any airline, even
that's
Southwest.
more than
So
to Mexico.
I know, which is crazy because the flight times are only 2 hours or something, and you can easily drive there for less than that. Or there's the train too, from the Bay Area to Salt Lake City. So there's a lot of options, and I don't know why flying is so expensive. It's just a bummer.
I mean, I mean, if you're flying like Delta or United, then it would be certainly much more expensive. Plus, like for example, this Viva Aerobus ticket, no, you don't. Of course, since it's a low cost carrier, you don't get any baggage. You also don't get any. The times are also inconvenient, right? So, for example, the flight from Chicago to Mexico City is a red eye, taking off at 11:15 p.m. and arriving at 4 in the morning in Mexico City, which is not great, you know?
I mean, I don't really have a problem with the timing in a sense, but if that's the only flight of the day that they're operating, it's kind of random because it is like they could easily do a daytime flight, or maybe it's just that the O'Hare Airport is so slot restricted
Yeah.
that they have to fly out at that time.
Yeah, I mean, I guess since these both of the airports are like really, popular per se. I guess it's that's the only way that they can do it to keep costs down.
And maybe that's just when the demand is high enough for low cost tourist flights like that.
I mean,
Because it does get you into Mexico City early in the morning, which would probably be attractive to some travelers.
I mean, I mean, I guess I would have thought otherwise because, like, first of all, you know, Chicago to Mexico City isn't exactly tourist routes. It's not like Chicago to you know Cancun or whatever. But like, I would have expected the traveler times to be more like land in the evenings, right, where you can go to the hotel immediately, instead of 4 a.m. where you have to wait all the morning and then all another few hours before you can put your luggage at wherever you're staying.
And I would too. It's interesting though because it seems like that's generally a pattern of flights from the U.S. to Latin America. At least because in San Francisco, most of the flights leave either really early in the morning or really late at night. Uh, like I think the Copa Airlines flight leaves and it's an overnight flight to Panama City, and then the Avianca flight at least there I believe there's two at least pre-COVID. There's one at night and one really early in the morning. So it's weird these patterns that they operate on, but I guess
I mean, I guess
it's just
for
established.
this route specifically, because like because you're just flying north and south. There's no change in time. I guess for this route, it's sort of like that because I know, like, for example, flights to and from South America and the U.S. because the flight time is like 8, 9, 10 hours exactly. They can operate red eyes and have it arrive at like 9, 10 a.m. But I guess since Mexico is too close, you have to get there at 4, which is 4 a.m., which is not ideal.
Which is not ideal at all.
Exactly.
And or maybe it's just a factor of competition of that it's really the only time they can stake out like a flight time that doesn't compete with other airlines because at least there's what Aeromexico flying it and probably United and American too.
Yeah, there's Aeromexico, Volaris. Um, I Is do the Mex do American Airlines have they begun they've resumed to Mexico City, right?
I don't know. I would think they
Oh,
fly there
they
because
do.
they have a.
Yeah, they do. They're just super expensive.
But Volaris is interesting because I would have thought they would be similar in price to Vero Airbus because they're both theoretically low cost carriers.
Theoretically, Polaris is like, yeah. I mean, I guess on other routes maybe more like domestic routes, but on this one it's more, I guess it's like Southwest. They're a con, a con low cost carrier.
Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned so you're going to Mexico City and Oaxaca, and to me you mentioned you were going to take an overnight bus. Is that
Well,
right?
I mean,
What are the
from Mexico City to Oaxaca, it'll just be. I don't think I'll be taking it overnight. Um, I have not closely examined the bus tickets yet, but I do know that I just looked at the prices. But it is a 7 hour bus journey to and from Mexico and Mexico City and Oaxaca, which should be decently interesting. The only times I've ever taken the bus system, the Adeo bus in Mexico, was to and from Cancun. The hotels, the hotel zone in Cancun and the airport. So I've never gone on this sort of long distance trip before.
7 hours would be super interesting at least to me because you would see a lot of the like interior of the country, right? Because Oaxaca is not on the coast, but is
Yeah,
it?
it's
You
inland.
would have to drive. Yeah,
It's inland. Well,
yeah, that'd be super cool just to go through the interior of the country and to see a lot of the smaller villages and towns.
yeah, at least see them when you're passing by, which should be pretty neat. But I mean, again, right? There's certainly some concerns, especially with COVID. Like returning to the United States from Mexico, you do need to procure a negative COVID test. But going into Mexico, there's no restrictions, but you have to get one coming back. And because I don't speak Spanish, that would be a slight worry, I suppose. But
Yeah,
we'll
there
see.
there are COVID test options at airports. They might be expensive.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I saw they're like $30 for one COVID test, $30 bucks.
Is it that much? Yeah, that's expensive for airport testing.
Yeah, because I mean, the airports. You're desperate, right? They're gonna crank up the price, like hella crank up the price.
And if you're already paying for a check bag, it almost just acts as like another fee. So yeah, if you could get a Spanish test or a test just like maybe if it's in Spanish but not at
In
the
a
airport, that's
pharmacy.
really
Yeah,
cheaper.
exactly.
Yeah, I guess you'll have to brush up on your Spanish for that.
Ah, have to pull out my middle school Spanish skills again. Hablas inglés. I'll be saying that.
But anyway, so I guess moving on from just looking at Mexico, we thought that in today's episode it would be interesting to look at the future and demise of Alitalia. So just
Yeah.
sort of
So
a quick
so
overview.
speaking of another country whose airline aviation is like who's speaking of another country whose aviation situation is not super ideal. Yeah, Alitalia.
We have in Italy right now Alitalia, as we have mentioned, which has been in existence in Italy since 1946. But as some of you viewers may have noticed recently, they're not selling tickets anymore because on October 15th they are officially folding and being completely restructured into a new airline, which is going to be called ITA, which I believe stands for Italia Trasporto Aereo. Uh, and it will be completely different from Alitalia with a lot of different components that we'll talk about and whatnot. But it will be completely different than anything we've seen before in Italy.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, well, I guess first of all, it should be just a little bit of context. The current flag carrier of Italy is Alitalia, um, which is notable for two things. Number one, that it's not just a generic Italy Airlines as other countries do, right? It actually has a decently memorable name. Um, but the second thing, which it's perhaps known more for is being a total financial basket case. Um, it is, in the past, right? The government and numerous other companies um, have injected billions and billions and billions of euros into the airline, but it is still, in economic shambles, and leading up all the way up to today, leading all the way up to this year of October, where they are folding for good.
And yeah, so to give a sense of just how unprofitable they are, like I mentioned earlier, Alitalia has been in existence since 1946, and in the 75 years that they've been operating, they have turned a profit only once in those years, which was in 1998. Now, I don't actually know the reasoning behind why that year was so successful, but for 74 years out of their history, they have been continually losing money, and completely changing their strategy. Actually, I don't believe they've ever had a formal business plan, except for maybe around 1998 when the CEO devised one. Like they've been completely mismanaged and completely they have a very short term vision for the most part of what the company's going to look like, and that shows in what they've done. They've really failed to expand, failed to be consistent in their messaging and branding and everything really under the company.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I guess it makes sense that, because what they've all what the people now, right? The people involved in restructuring the new airline. I'm sorry, in setting up the new airline on the backs of Alitalia, is that they are saying that, like, this is not another, this is not just a rebranding of Alitalia, right? In fact, Alitalia is basically basically being set to die on its own, because people are eager to push this as a new identity, right? As a new Italian airline, one which will invoke the pride of Italy, which Alitalia had in the beginning years of its history. Um, but ITA will not be, well, it will physically not be taking on any of Alitalia's, the sort of the assets which are really unprofitable, which would send ITA onto a course for disaster. They're just really eager to rebrand it as a new airline, not as another restructuring of Alitalia.
Well, and the point that you make about nationalism is interesting because, at least from what I've researched, there's been a lot of criticism leveled at Alitalia because they've been so focused on nationalism and essentially being a patriotic airline over the course of their history, and that they almost placed too much emphasis on being like Italian owned or Italian backed, and I think it limited them for a while in attracting investors and in company strategy because they really tried to focus on being just essentially a version of Italy just in the skies, and in many ways think that was limiting for them in terms of what they could offer, where they could fly,
Mm-hmm.
and it also took until 2014 to get a foreign investor because they were mostly looking for Italian investors. So the direction of the company was really limited by that patriotism in a sense, which was one of the reasons why they were failing financially.
I mean, yeah, for sure. That does make sense. Like, you see, the big, like many of the big profitable airlines, Emirates, Singapore Airlines, they're not, explicitly hard pushing, Emirati pride or Singaporean pride, right? It's more, just good service in general, which certainly does make sense in limiting Alitalia's, um, performance. But I will say that, like, at least in its early years, right? And I've been reading up on this. You know, when global air travel began to become more accessible to the general public, Alitalia really did have a good name for the brand, right? It was a it made it was notable because they had the sort of service, familiar Italian food, Italian hospitality in the air, um, which is something that throughout the various researcher programs they have been trying to revive, but I think it certainly makes sense that that is certainly very limiting in terms of in the actual modern aviation market, especially with, for example, all the low cost carriers and all the other high quality service airlines who are competing against Alitalia.
Yeah, and and for so long, Alitalia really didn't have a competitor in a sense, because for most of their history, they had almost like 80% or 90% of the slots at airports,
Hmm.
and a lot of the competition that would start up in Italy just really didn't compete with Alitalia on the scale that we see in some other countries, like with in South Korea, for example. And I believe it took until like the 1991 time period for a competitor, which was Meridiana, to start up. And even Meridiana didn't really compete in terms of its business model with Alitalia. And then there was the introduction of Air One later in the 90s, which Alitalia ended up taking over and converting into a low cost carrier. So for most of its history, Alitalia has really been without a competitor, which is also partially to blame for their failures, because I think in some ways Alitalia has taken this monopolistic position for granted and not really tried to be innovative at the same time.
Well, actually, Alitalia runs a monopoly on all the city. They actually run a national monopoly um, on Vatican City.
Oh, is that they operate the papal flights? Is that right?
Yeah, they do. Alitalia is the airline of choice that the Pope takes. It's actually pretty funny. Basically, I believe it was since I believe 1964. Alitalia has been the Pope's official airline, and it's pretty funny because when the Pope rides it, they refer to the plane. The plane is always given the flight number AZ 4000, Alitalia 4000, and it's always referred to as Shepherd One, which is a play on Air Force One.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, they do have a monopoly on Vatican
On Vatican
on
City.
Vatican City.
Now I wonder if that'll stay consistent with ITA and whether they will stick with ITA. It's actually interesting because ITA is taking over a lot of Alitalia's assets, but they're only starting with I believe 52 planes, so they're really only a shell of what Alitalia used to operate. And I didn't check specifically, but I don't know how many long haul planes they're actually going to have, and if they're even going to be capable of providing Shepherd One flights.
I mean, they say that like they're gonna acquire 52 of Alitalia's fleet like immediately, which is in like compared to other new airlines, that is a lot. 52 right off the bat. But and they have plans, in by 2025 they will get this all the way up to like over 100. Um, so I mean, I guess it would certainly, it's certainly a lot compared to other new airlines, but I mean, it's not like Alitalia didn't have profitable routes. Um, so I mean, I guess you need that sort of service, and especially since the airline will be owned by the Italian government.
But for essentially ITA is becoming the new flag carrier for Italy and will be exclusively operating, I believe, just the profitable routes that Alitalia flew. And when you compare that to some of the other flag carriers like Iberia or Finnair or Lufthansa or British Airways or Air France, it's incredibly small relatively for a country that is very has a very high political capital, soft power, and a lot of global and economic influence. So for a flag carrier, of course, it feels very small.
Yeah, Italy has a huge
And,
amount of soft power.
and Italy too also is the fourth largest airline market in Europe. So there's a lot of air traffic, and now we'll see that their flag carrier is going to be quite small once it starts up in October.
Well, I mean, I guess now is a good time to talk about some like, for example, the problems that ITA will face, right? Which I think the biggest problem and one that Alitalia struggled with a lot, aside from lack of money, of course, is as I think we touched on before, the issue of branding, because does Alitalia did Alitalia, right, and will ITA brand itself as patriotic national Italian pride? Will it brand itself as something more Lufthansa Emirates-esque, luxury and quality service? Will it brand itself something more as, a more run-of-the-mill um, flag carrier? Something along the lines of, I don't know, Czech Airlines or Air Serbia, which certainly has a presence, but is not of the tier that Lufthansa or Emirates operates. Um, I mean, I don't know. What do you think? What do you think would be, how is how is the Italian government going to put ITA into action?
So ITA, to my knowledge, is taking over a lot of assets from Alitalia, notably the frequent flyer program Mile Miglia, and some planes and some slots. And I think that indicates to me that there is still a lot of Alitalia branding they're inheriting. And as we mentioned, Alitalia's branding was exclusively like Italian nationalist and patriotic. So in those ways, I think it's very similar and consistent with Alitalia's branding. But also, just a search on Wikipedia, they show a logo for ITA, which is colored in the Italian colors, and I kind of like it actually. It looks a bit more modern and refreshed than Alitalia's logo, and to me that suggests that there's still a very concerted effort to look and appear Italian, and to offer essentially like an Italian experience in the air, despite it being pretty small. So I would expect that it would still be very consistent with the Italian image, but I don't know in a sense that that's limiting because, uh, at least from the outset, it appears that ITA has a very clear focus going forward on being profitable and less as much on the branding side of things, which was seemingly what Alitalia was focused on.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at this logo. I mean, I guess it's sort of I guess it's what you'd expect. The ITA, INT are in green, and then the A is the colors of the Italian flag. Um, yeah, I mean it's pretty. I guess it's pretty notable when like you're painting. Your like the entirety of your plane is basically the Italian flag. That's certainly representative of. That's not even subtle. That's just plain out invoking um, Italian Italian pride. Um, but I mean, I guess it would be in everybody's best interest, right, to not be limited in that way, as you said. If with the focus more on um, profitability first before anything else. Um, well, that's first of all the only way to survive, but also um, it would also, for example, limit. It would also help prevent another repeat of what Alitalia has been through, which has been super burdensome for all the parties involved, including other airlines, including the Italian government, and including the Italian people, right? So, for example, in 2020, the Italian government injected 3 billion euros into Alitalia. I mean, somebody's got to pay for that. And the Italian people certainly were not very happy with Alitalia's, fight for survival, always being in the flailing state, having to inject more and more and more and more money. And I doubt that the Italian people coming up with that the Italian people continuing on in the future, um, they as with anybody having to pay taxes, right? You don't want a repeat of that. Um, it
Hmm.
wouldn't be good for the government either, who relies on of course the people to win elections.
And that's where branding I think is key because Alitalia for so long had this I guess sense of venerability and being around for 75 years and this national nostalgia symbol in a sense that even if it wasn't profitable it still was like a very I guess critical example of Italian soft power and of Italian aviation, which ITA is definitely not going to have because it's going to be a very new enterprise, new branding, and probably pretty foreign to a lot of Italians who would expect Alitalia to be flying and not ITA. And also in branding, I mean, ITA itself is not a very attractive name, at least to me.
Ita,
Uh,
ita.
yeah, like I would expect like Alitalia is at least way more easier to say. I guess phonetically is a lot smoother,
Yeah,
and
it's
just
more
seeing a plane
unique.
with
Exactly.
like like a plane with ITA is like like I don't know. It doesn't really feel attractive to me, and it just feels it's like abbreviating Middle Eastern Airlines to MEA. Like it's just not very. It's like not very catchy.
Yeah, Middle Eastern Airlines is like I don't like that name, but it's so generic. Like you have British Airways, gee thanks. You have right Austrian Airlines, thanks. Air Canada. Alitalia is one of the few who has a unique name, like Lufthansa, right? That's unique. Um, Unfortunately, there's not too many of those, but ITA is I guess on um, at least in terms of naming, it's not unique at all. If anything, they're just missing the Lia because Italia. They just chopped off half of Italy's name in Italian. So
I mean, they could have picked a name like like Italiana or like Italia or something like that. But it does make you think of SAS because I believe in English they go by Scandinavian Airlines System. I don't know if they have a Danish name. I assume they do, or a Norwegian name. But in a way, that's very much what ITA is doing, where they go by Italiana Trasporto Aereo and shortening down to ITA. So maybe it'll function like SAS, and SAS is, I guess, more of a household name now. But
or
I
yeah,
assume ITA will
SAS or
be
even like for example KLM, right? Which is um, well KLM in Dutch it literally just means Royal Aviation Company, right? Um, but KLM has established to become sort of unique, a more household name. Maybe ITA will be the same thing. But I do what you just said in that you know having that sort of nostalgia of Alitalia and always being the one. That's but and that sort of nostalgia keep hindering them from becoming more successful. That's sort of like the Pan Am mindset in the later days, eh? Where they have this just air of you know sort of inevitability, right? Like this our airline will always be around because we were the first. We were the true first Italian airline, the true first American airline, right? One who pioneered a lot of things, but in the end, it only ultimately led to the airline's demise, and then being replaced with in Pan Am's case, the big three, United, American, Delta, who are certainly much more modern, certainly much more flexible.
innovative, especially.
Exactly,
Yeah.
innovative. They're more flexible in everything, which I mean, I suppose is what ITA hopes to be, but it can't get caught up in the Alitalia nostalgia.
Yeah, nostalgia is very much a double-edged sword, like you mentioned, because it's great in I guess keeping loyalty and attracting Italians and recognizing that okay they're flying on this very nostalgic airline and they want to seek those experiences, but but at the same time it is very limiting as we've talked about because the company really just goes for focusing on domestic operations primarily one and also marketing itself as just like this very Italian patriotic airline, but not really having actually a strategy for profitability and picking routes that maybe will expand the network and or do things like that, which obviously cost Alitalia.
I mean, well, here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, right? One of the officials at Alitalia actually said this quote, in reference to constantly having to inject money into Alitalia. He said, "quote It's like curing a terminal patient. You can try to make him feel less pain for a while, but not forever. That is therapeutic obstinacy, right? So, and that principle is certainly true, right? If you have, for example, a terminal patient, you can't. If it's terminal, there really is no way to fix it, right? You can inject all the medicine you want, but that's not going to help. In the same way, Alitalia was sort of flawed in that sort of mindset, um, and as a result, just constantly, no matter how much money you throw at them, it wasn't going to work. The Italian people, right? The companies, other companies involved, everybody, they're just frustrated about Alitalia, and they have been for a while, both in terms of having to pay for it, but also because the service had declines as well, right? There were lots of strikes, lots of a lot of canceled flights, reduced networking as well. So ITA will have to overcome all of these barriers as well, to really paint themselves as, okay, we are not them, which, like I said, is what a lot of people are trying to do. But again, they also still have to find a way to be unique amongst uh, themselves as well, which ties into making creating the ITA identity. Whether or not they'll be able to do that, that is up for time to tell. Um, you know, it, the major Italian airline has just is going to collapse. It's still too early to talk about whether or not it's still too early to at least make a conclusion on whether or not this new one can be successful right away.
Well, yeah, and with Alitalia at least, the analogy about the terminal patient is interesting because in a way there's a lot of things you can do earlier in your life to prevent the chance that you do get a terminal illness, and that to me rings true for Alitalia because they were really, as we've talked about, devoid of any kind of strategy or formal business plan for a really long time, and at least in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, they could have been doing a lot of innovating or expanding their route network or creating new technologies like frequent flyer programs earlier, or doing, I guess, online ticketing and things that a lot of other airlines did. That Alitalia was, I guess, slower to do, and the government was really not really liberalizing, or I guess liberalized enough to provide Alitalia flexibility. So in many ways, ITA is in a much better position because, as we've mentioned, they're starting with a lot of profitable assets and have a lot more structure to them and a lot more, I guess, conservatancy, in that they're starting really small and I guess expanding fairly slowly with only doubling the fleet size in, what is it, 4 years. So they've got a long way to go to even just get back to Alitalia size, and I like that they're doing it in a conservative
They're
manner,
not
picking
rushing.
cities that, yeah. Which, speaking of which, I do want to go over just what their initial plans are for what they want to serve. Uh, at least, so right now Alitalia has a lot of flights to the U.S., both to the East Coast, to the Midwest, and to the West Coast. But notably, ITA plans to only fly to New York and Boston preliminarily, and nowhere on the West Coast or even west of the East Coast.
Well, yeah. I mean, at least in the United States, they'll be only commencing immediately to New York, Boston, and Miami, which makes sense because Italiano, right? Um, then it says they have announced that, like, from 2022, they will continue flights in the U.S. from to and from Rome and Washington D.C., as well as Los Angeles, and then after that, 2023, Chicago and San Francisco, right? So this is, like, a very, very, very generic plan for service to and from the United States and Europe, right? Certainly, all of these routes are very high demand. New York to Rome, New York, Boston, Miami to Rome and Milan. They're very high demand. Even in 2023, right? Chicago, San Francisco. Jack, I'm sure you'll be able to tell us how. I mean, I'm sure you'll be able to tell us that San Francisco people love Italia, eh?
It's interesting. I was going to highlight that actually we did not have a direct flight to Rome until, I believe, 2018. Like, even before that, Alitalia didn't fly here, and I don't believe
Oh,
United had a nonstop flight at all. So we've been really devoid
so
of
was it
service
was it
to
was it the United?
Italy.
The United that was it United that flew from San Francisco to in Rome?
They do now. I don't actually remember when they started that service. But I believe it was slightly before Alitalia, and I think Alitalia came in as a response to United.
Really? To and from San Francisco?
Yeah, exactly. But I that goes to show. I mean, at least from my perspective, I don't actually think there's a lot of demand to Italy. Certainly not business demand, because there's mostly tech companies in the Bay Area that often have far more demand to Asia, at least, and we've seen, at least at SFO, a major boom of Asian routes, especially to India.
I mean,
But nothing really to Europe.
I would have expected, like Rome, cities like Rome and Milan. They're not, they are centers of development and all that. But I mean, I guess it's since Italy is such at least in the United States, Italy is such a you know, what's the best word? Romanticized country. Everybody wants to go. Well, all over the
Hmm.
world, actually, right? It's so romanticized. You know, the city that you fly to in Italy is literally the city whose what am I saying? The city whose name the word romance comes from, right? Um, romance. Um, so I mean, there's you can basically, I guess, wherever they fly, as long as there's it's a decently big city, there will certainly be lots of demand, and that is Italy is not a market where you have to explicitly promote demand, right? It's not like, for example, a lot of it's not like, for example, a lot of countries in Africa and Asia where the airlines of those countries have to not only provide service to already existing markets with demand, but also have to promote their country there in general, right?
And sell the tourism there. Yeah.
Exactly. Italy, you don't need to do any of that. Conversely, though, you have the other problem, which is that there's too many airlines who want to service Italy, right? Which is also what partially led to the downfall of Alitalia. You have so many. You just have all the big European airlines servicing Milan, Rome, Naples, to and from their own hubs. You have low cost carriers in there. Ryanair has a very, very extensive network in Italy. In terms of long haul, again, there's lots of connections to and from Paris and Berlin and everywhere else. Such that for a lot of for a lot of tourists who arrive in Italy, it makes so much more sense to fly via London or Paris or wherever else. And that's again, that's really the challenge for ITA. Not promoting Italy. Italy is well promoted, but in promoting this nonstop connection and making that affordable enough. Affordable enough to attract customers, but not so affordable as to not so cheap so as to ensure profitability.
Hmm. And briefly going back to San Francisco for a bit, we did have from 2018 to 2020 there was Air Italy, which was a Qatar Airways backed low cost carrier that flew, I believe, almost only exclusively long haul
Mm-hmm.
out of Rome and Milan, but they flew to San Francisco, and that route quickly was pulled. So the long haul situation is interesting because that may have just been just a lack of name recognition, or maybe just the airline was selling seats but couldn't really sustain routes elsewhere. But either way, the long haul market to Italy, both especially in the low cost realm, with both Norwegian and Air Italy folding pretty quickly. I'm really curious to see what ITA can do in that space. To my knowledge, I believe the long haul routes are actually the most profitable in Alitalia's network,
Mm-hmm.
which is why it looks like ITA wants to continue a lot of them, especially to New York and to Boston. Uh, but of course, we've seen a lot of failures too, like I pointed out, and it will be really interesting to see which or what ends up happening to ITA, because they aren't going to be a low cost carrier, and they have um, a fairly decent product that they would be inheriting from Alitalia. And I don't know if they're going to create their own product or not. I would imagine probably, but who knows what it's going to look like.
Mm-hmm. 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 I mean, yeah, especially you did mention Air Italy, which is sort of an example to see what is a wrong way of operating, right? Um, and is something which ITA which will really want to look at as an example to avoid, because Air Italy only commenced operations in 2018 and they shut down 2 years later in 2020. Um, the shutdown was of course 2020, February 2020. That is when a certain something came into the world and had some minor disruptions on aviation. But in reality, Air Italy had been struggling long before that, right? Um, and if
Well,
you look at the reasons, it's pretty clear to see. They didn't have name recognition. They had competition on nearly all of its routes, both international and domestic. Even within Italy, they failed to capture any of the market because if you looked at um, in the week of, for example, in 2020, if you look at this chart, at just before they went into liquidation, Air Italy, they were the 11th largest airline in Italy by seat capacity. They were beat by Air France, Eurowings, British Airways, and Lufthansa, not to mention any of the low cost carriers. Um, so it was a pretty abysmal performance. They also expand. Another big issue is that ITA expanded way. I'm sorry, Air Italy expanded way too fast. Um, some
Exactly. Yeah.
like if for example, they had long haul routes like almost just within 2 years to Mumbai, Delhi, Bangkok, and some of the others, as you mentioned, right, San Francisco too. They were obviously trying, backed by Qatar Airways, they were trying to recreate some of that, but it was just um, not realistic, right? You can't grow too fast, otherwise you'll just fall flat on your face.
Hmm. And Air Italy, yeah, as you mentioned, they expanded super quickly, and notably both Air Italy and Alitalia, at least between 2014 and now, have been invested in by Middle Eastern airlines, because we saw in
Oh yeah,
2014
Etihad.
Etihad took a 49% stake in Alitalia, which backfired horribly on them. I believe they've lost millions of dollars on that investment. But ITA will definitely not be invested in by a Middle Eastern airline, at least for now. I heard they're looking for a partner to work with, which will also impact which alliance they join. So there's potential cooperation with ITA in the future, but they won't be seemingly having a major investment backing by another airline, which might be good because it will at least limit how much they can expand if they don't have an overflow of
Yeah,
funding.
they can't piggyback on that and try to feign sort of profitability and try to seem better, greater than they actually are.
Mhm. And the alliance point that I mentioned is interesting because Alitalia has for been almost 20 years been in SkyTeam, and ITA preliminarily will not be in an alliance. So SkyTeam will be losing a very key member of the alliance, which was that you could fly to Italy on SkyTeam, which you can't do in any of the other airlines, at least directly. I mean, sure, you can fly Lufthansa or Air France and get close to Italy, but you can't get there directly. So ITA and whatever alliance they're joining, which I've heard could be, they might partner with Delta or they might partner with Lufthansa. So that would be a major addition if they were to join an alliance, and be huge if they join Star Alliance, which has not previously had an Italian airline.
Yeah, I mean, when you said SkyTeam is losing such a critical member, yeah, they really are losing. At least looking at the list, the only major airline to be in serious financial trouble.
And even if they are doing horribly, they still, in terms of the name recognition and power, I mean, I had always thought that Alitalia was in the top five of SkyTeam Airlines, or maybe top six in terms of its like brand name and total political and social capital, or maybe it's just its aviation hegemony, shall we say? But they are obviously leaving SkyTeam on October 15th.
I guess it'll be interesting to see how and whether or not ITA really decides to join an alliance, because at least in terms of the routes, right? Um, so I mean, referencing the same chart of like before COVID happened, um, the different airlines by their seat share in you know by their seat share in terms of the Italian aviation market. Alitalia actually only comes in third behind Ryanair and EasyJet. Um, but the problem is Alitalia at that time only had around 12% of all Italian seat capacity, which is really not great, and really shows and really goes to the extent to show how abysmally the airline performed, at least in terms of its um, domestic network, which is where obviously most of the profits are to be found. So ITA will be entering that again, with huge competition from low cost carriers, um, which I suppose will be another interesting thing to consider, because um, as of right now, some airlines, are some of the national airlines in Europe especially are really lacking in terms of their domestic competition. They are focused almost entirely on being the international ones, right? Um, there are obviously certainly some exceptions. KLM runs a ton of flights to and from small cities in the Netherlands, but also to tons of small cities in and around other countries. Whereas other airlines, Air France, Lufthansa, aren't exactly super domestic friendly, and leave all that market up to the low cost carriers. Um, I mean, I would suppose that ITA would also you know be in the type be in the latter type and not be engaged in the vicious competition between low costs between Rome and you know Milan, Rome, and Venice. Um, Although, I mean, if they are pivoting far away from Alitalia, that is certainly a possibility, eh?
So I'm looking at the list of destinations now. They're currently planning on starting with 16 destinations, and they're mostly just all the main cities like the Bologna, Catania. They're not flying to Florence, which is interesting, but they're flying to like Genoa, Naples, Palermo,
Well,
Turin, Venice.
Florence is a big hub for Ryanair, right? No,
I
it's
think you're
not.
right, but it's also fairly close to other cities like Bologna
Yeah,
or
that's
Rome. You
right.
can easily take the train anywhere.
That's
But
right.
what's interesting, at least here, so they're flying to Milan, but they're flying only to Linate Airport, which at least from my research into Alitalia, was very contentious for them because Alitalia seemingly had no idea whether they wanted to fly to both Malpensa and Linate or both, and they kept flip flopping. But now we see clearly that Linate at least is the preferred domestic airport for flights in Italy, and I guess that makes sense because it'd be easy, it's closer to the city, and there's a bit less competition from bigger airlines.
Mm-hmm.
I Linate still is a large hub, or not necessarily a hub, but they do have flights on EasyJet and on Wizz Air,
Mm-hmm.
some of them. So I mean, there is competition, but it would be much better suited for domestic travel.
The Linate Airport. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
For sure. Malpensa is located like way out, far away from Milan city center. Um, but yeah, it's I guess that small differentiation is really important because I guess that means that ITA is like wanting to brand themselves as also one that cares an airline which cares about the domestic network very well, eh?
I think so. But at the same time, Alitalia is serving way more destinations in Italy than ITA is at least starting on. And at its peak, Alitalia served a lot of destinations and have cut back on a lot of them and have cut service to a lot of them. At least I know that in Pisa, for example, they cut nearly all of their flights to any city that wasn't Rome or Olbia.
Mm-hmm.
But and I think that's generally a pattern at a lot of airports that with all of the service cuts and employee cuts they've been doing, they've been losing a lot of that domestic network, and it seems like to me that the ITA is only inheriting the profitable parts, which isn't going to leave them with much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even to and from all of the Italian domestic cities, all the minor ones, it was really just another hub and spoke model, only to either Milan or Rome, Fiumicino, um, which you really have to which in Alitalia's case there really was no incentive to be loyal to those routes because you could either take Ryanair or something to anywhere else in Europe, or you could take another airlines connection, a foreign airlines connections, Air France, Lufthansa, to and connect their worldwide network, which is certainly much more, um, shall we say, exquisite than Alitalia. Although I don't know.
And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and thinking domestically too in Italy, you have also heavy competition from not only low cost carriers that may be better to some people, but you have the train services as well, like the Frecciarossa high speed rail or the Frecciargento or some other services too. But like you can go from places in Italy pretty quickly on the train. I think it's only 2 or 3 hours to get to Milan by train, which could compete really well with flights. So in some ways, I don't know that the domestic flight network is all that important for ITA, but they could do something where they, and actually a lot of other airlines, I think KLM and Air France have done this, where you can book a train ticket through the airline and
Mm-hmm.
it's a code share. And that might actually be something that could work really well in Italy because you can transfer pretty easily between almost any airport in Italy, at least in the big cities, and then just book a plane ticket as well. So that I think is actually probably going to be a better strategy for ITA than just trying
For
to
sure.
build up a domestic
For
network.
sure. I mean, I know that, for example, in Alitalia's case, the Italian railroad company was, very interested in, both partnering and in helping out, right? Because of course, strong aviation market means, well, strong international aviation market means, more people to come and take railways. Um, but I mean, if ITA is able to get that sort of agreement in place, that would be amazing. Because I know people in Italy, and they say, it is, the train is super convenient for domestic travel. So that will be, if you can't, sort of the principle of, if you can't beat, if you can't, what's the saying, right? If it's basically, if you can't beat them, like, be their friend, so you can join forces, right? Um, which would certainly be beneficial in ITA's case.
And for the railways too, because then they would have all of the ITA passengers booking connecting legs on them. And I guess it's just like a regular code share for aviation where it really benefits both sides as long as you can get it approved,
Mm-hmm.
of course. But as we come towards the end of this, obviously there's one big question that we need to answer, which is that in general, is ITA going to be successful, and is it going to actually be profitable?
So let me offer my 2 cents, just like general statements, right? All speculation, of course. I think that ITA, given this its style, I think it is certainly going to be much more successful than Alitalia. I think that it will be something on par with, at least, for now, it will be something on par with and develop into, for example, Tap A Portugal, Tap Portugal, Tap Air Portugal, right? Or for example, Iberia, not worldwide renowned, but certainly, they have a decent presence. And it's also comparable because, both Portugal and Spain are also decently romanticized in their own right. They're certainly not Air France, Lufthansa, Emirates, um, Qatar Airways, not to that caliber, but they are making sure to not expand too fast, just as how TAP Air Portugal and Iberia, the two of them are also not in the business of flying absolutely everywhere. In fact, it's not only the planes, but even for example, the staff numbers. Alitalia had more than 10,000 workers. ITA will only be starting off with 2,800, right? So it is a pretty cautious approach, a pretty conservative approach. And I think that will be able to lead them certainly up to success if they can capitalize on, if they can use the Italian aviation market demand properly, um, and is able to balance both, the competition with other international carriers as well as the competition with, either the railways and the domestic low cost carriers. But I think their current current status, current scheme will be a successful one, is my opinion. What do you think?
I think I agree because and your comparison to Iberia and TAP seems well founded to me. TAP though is a bit interesting because they are going very heavily on connecting and having people connect through Portugal on cheap flights, both in
Mm-hmm.
economy and business. So I would think their ITA at least is a bit closer to Iberia and maybe also a lot Polish airlines because
Mm.
those airlines have a smaller fleet and don't really focus as much on connectivity and are both fairly patriotic in a sense, and they
Right.
both go for national pride, um, and they're expanding conservatively, but also expanding as well. Like LOT is adding international destinations, as is Iberia. So, and I think ITA, once they get to the full capacity and their full fleet size in 2025 and even beyond that, it'll probably turn out like a lot or an Iberia, I would think. But you never know. They could, I guess, gain prestige, but I think that they'll also have to coincide with just airport development in Italy, because Rome really is not a very good place to connect, based on what I've heard, and the airport itself is run down. And I think if you want to create a major international hub with the major international airline, you just need general airport improvements as well.
Yeah, I mean that is certainly with Rome being a connection, that's also up to the long term. See what happens. There's certainly potential for Rome, just like how it had back in the day, where Rome was very often the connector to and from Europe and Africa. The problem is that the Italian airline presence at Rome has declined, and it's been taken over by Paris, Frankfurt, London. But there's certainly potential. It is located smack dab in the middle. Well, I mean, pretty close to the middle of the Mediterranean. So it is. It would be a pretty ideal connecting spot for, especially in the future, as more flights open to and from Africa and Europe. That will be, maybe we can see more development on that front. But with ITA, of course, it is all speculation. We will see. As with any major transit topic, it is all speculation. For now, at least, there is still 1.5 months to fly on Alitalia before it's gone forever. It'll be in our hearts. Um, it'll be in our hearts from then on. After that, though, it will be ITA all the way. And we will just have to see how it turns out, right? It may have the slow build up to success. It may fall flat on its face right out the door. Um, but in any case, um, you know whether or not it turns into the former glory, or whether or not it just falls and becomes another Air Italy, again, we will have to see.